For more on this, I'm joined by Professor at University of Southeastern Norway, Glenn Diesen. Glenn, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's great to have you on the show with me. I just want to reflect a little bit about what we just heard from Donald Trump in an interview with Politico. The US president says Russia has the upper hand in peace negotiations and Volodymyr Zelensky needs to start accepting things. Why is the US administration siding with Russia on the Ukraine war at this very moment?
Well, I don't think he's siding with Russia. I think it's just recognizing reality. That is, we've been fighting this proxy war against Russia for the past 4 years, but it's a war of attrition in which you exhaust the adversary until the adversary collapses. Now, long story short, NATO ran out of weapons as well as Ukrainian soldiers. So in NATO, NATO lost this war. So the longer one waits for a settlement, the worse that deal is going to be, because now that the Ukrainian army is collapsing, the Russians will move forward faster and faster, taking more and more strategic territory. And this is the thing, if they don't get a deal, peace deal, where Ukraine commits to return to its neutrality, then Russia will simply seize the territory, which it can't afford to see being lost to NATO. So I think it's just in the self-interest of the United States to recognize that the war has come to an end and that they lost it.
Zelensky is going to share an updated peace plan with the US today, saying there's still no agreement on giving up land. Will Russia accept the agreement on this basis, or is land the Kremlin's top prize? Because, Professor, this seems to be one of the major sticking points at the moment.
No, you're correct. And again, if we go back to the beginning of 2022, the main thing the Russians asked for in Istanbul was neutrality. But of course, it's been 4 years of fighting since, and NATO got more and more involved. Indeed, we crossed the line between a proxy war and a direct war, which is why now the Russians see territorial control as being a guarantee that the neutrality will stick. In other words, there's less of Ukraine that can be used as a front line against Russia in the future. So this is how the Russians see it. So I don't think that the Russians will be willing to give any concessions on this territory. Well, they would be willing to give some concessions. I don't think they would be willing to give up Donbass.
Professor Glenn, we seem to have lost your line there. I do apologise. Hopefully we can get him back up. If not, we were just speaking to him about the latest interview that Donald Trump had been doing on Politico. Professor Glenn, I do think we have you back on the line, do we? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sorry, I'm not sure what happened there.
No, that's absolutely no problem. Sometimes the internet does fail us. But we're just talking there about what concessions Russia could maybe have in place that it could agree to in order to end the fighting, because we spoke about land and territory, and that's probably not one of them.
Well, what can't be negotiated is what they're seen as having started the war, which was the coup in 2014, that is, which stripped Ukraine of its neutrality. So the main source, the main foundation of any peace agreement has to be for Ukraine to restore its neutrality. This places some strict limitations on what kind of security guarantees they will accept from NATO. And of course, after 4 years, they also want the territorial concessions. Now, on this, I don't think there's that much they can compromise on. Like I said, Donbass is not up for compromise. I think Zaporizhia and Kherson, they're willing to stop where they are now. I think that kind of concession they could give. The size of the Ukrainian army, they would be willing to negotiate. The extent to which the existing regime in Kyiv stays, I think also possible that there's some room for negotiation. But the issue of neutrality and Donbass, I don't think the Russians will move at all.
And as we have this discussion right now, you and I, men are dying on the front line, and President Trump is putting lots of energy into this peace agreement. Is Putin preparing for more war, not a peace plan, and to ignore Trump's demands to stop fighting?
Well, here's the thing, that the Russians, they believe that they are fighting a war which is an existential threat. That is, as the Russians have been saying for years and years, NATO in Ukraine is an existential threat. So this is a war they think they can't walk away from. This is why they set these very clear objectives, which are, many of them are non-negotiable. They will either achieve them through war or diplomacy. That is, for NATO to back away from Ukraine. Again, for the Russians, it would be as if Russia would establish military bases and missile systems in Mexico. It's just, it's not acceptable. So the Russians have been asking essentially for some common European security architecture for the past 35 years. And now, of course, that it's not just existential, but they're also winning this war. I don't think they're going to be willing to make any concessions on the key demands. But again, there's a historical opportunity here. That is that the United States seems very willing to end essentially the past 100 years of confrontation and seek some kind of a peaceful coexistence with Russia to essentially adjust to this new multipolar world. So I think that in light of this, there's many in Moscow now who would like to make some concessions to Trump to change this relationship, to end this zero-sum rivalry which we've had for so long. But at the same time, they do recognize that this has been a proxy war. That is, it's Americans who've been fighting the Russians primarily. It's Americans' weapons, logistics, intelligence, targeting, war planning, financing. So a lot of these missiles as well are operated and fired by American contractors. So this has been an American-led war, the way they see it, which has cost the lives of tens of thousands of Russians. So they don't know who the new government in Washington will be. So they're a bit of confronted with a dilemma. They have an historical opportunity to improve relations with the United States now. On the other hand, they don't want to put themselves in a vulnerable position.
And I just want to ask you a final question, because, as I was saying, Donald Trump has launched this wide-ranging attack on European leaders in an interview with Politico. And what do you make of the new US security strategy, which has been interpreted differently by various different people? Is this a divorce from Europe? And what is Trump's view on Europe right now?
Well, I don't think it's a complete divorce, but it's deprioritizing Europe. That is, under the hegemonic order after the Cold War, then the US pursued global primacy. To do this, they partnered up primarily with the Europeans to have collective hegemony. This is why NATO expansion became a core component of US security strategy. But now the reality of the world is that it's multipolar, has many centers of power, China being the leading one after the US. So given that the world is multipolar, the US will have other strategic interest. Its main interest will be to shore up its control over the Western Hemisphere, and the second will be to confront or contain China in Asia. Europe perhaps comes in at a far third, but maybe in the Middle East will be a higher priority. So Europe is no longer high priority, and the United States doesn't really want to waste that much more resources. They want to take their finite resources and prioritize on other regions. And also there's a concern about the more ideologies we see now in Europe. So and again, I do agree that the European leaders interpret this very hostile, because this new security strategy points out that the European countries are becoming more authoritarian in terms of marginalizing political opposition, the media. And so for this reason, even encouraging the United States suggests it will seek to cultivate an opposition to counter this European elites. And of course, the US would like also to end the NATO expansionism. Again, as this belongs to the old hegemonic order, which is dying, or is already gone. So I think it's just the United States adjusting to a multipolar world according to a very Kissinger view.
Glenn Diesen, it was brilliant to speak to you. Thank you so much for your analysis and time. We're now joined by defence and security analyst Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, great to have you on the show. I don't know if you were just hearing my conversation there with Professor Glenn, but I just want to ask you the very same question that I asked him. What do you make of the new national security strategy? Do you think Europe is alone, or is it the US readjusting?
Yes, well, good evening. I did hear those comments. I was baffled, but not surprised, I suppose, to see him putting that case forward that Russia is the innocent party here, and Ukraine should really give up a lot of its territory, including Donbass as well, and Odessa, the port. Yes, you're right. Turning to Trump's national security strategy, it's been a difficult year with the American president in charge. Europe has shown huge patience with him, going to almost embarrassing lengths. We've seen leader after leader going into the White House, stroking his ego, praising his leadership, flattering him in the hope of avoiding tariffs, keeping him engaged with Europe, and hopefully against Russia. And the evidence was already there that that strategy wasn't working, seeing how Trump treated President Zelensky back in the Oval Office in February, I think it was, halting weapons deliveries, cutting intelligence aid and so on. And of course, that embarrassing Alaska summit, bringing in Putin from the cold. But all that subservience, where has it ended up? We've been tiptoeing around Trump, fearing he might walk away. And now he has. It's confirmed in the national security strategy. It makes it official. America is embarking on a seismic ideological shift in global engagement. It's becoming more isolationist. It's less engaged in defending global order as a whole, but specifically it's dialing back from Europe. So it's quite right that European officials, that capital cities now talk to each other in recognizing that despite what the last contributor said, Russia remains a threat to all of Europe, not least Ukraine. It's now up to us to put this fire out if America is choosing to step back.
And in an interview with Politico, Trump also accused Ukraine's European allies of talking too much and not delivering for the war-torn country. Any surprises in Trump's latest interview doubling down on Europe? And Tobias, does he actually have a point? Because a lot of the time we speak to each other and it seems like Europe are always having talks about talks.
It is, but why are we having talks about talks? I mean, you make such an important point. The reason why we've had talks about talks is because we've been waiting for Donald Trump to somehow use the power of the White House to strike a deal. And attempt after attempt has clearly failed. But it's not just failed because the effort by America. It's because America was pursuing a very different outcome. It simply wants a fast deal so America can start trading with Russia, bring Putin in from the cold. That is the distinct difference between European thinking that treats Russia as an ideological threat and America that simply thinks this is all going to go away if some sort of deal is signed. I've said on this program, I think in the past, every day Britain is somehow attacked by Russia. Our territorial waters are infiltrated by Russian boats now. We have undersea cables threatened, cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns. This is today. Imagine what would happen if Russia was successful in Ukraine. It would only get worse. And it's very sad that America doesn't see this, see the wider threat that Russia poses against Europe. And to have Europe and America not on the same page when the rest of the world is also becoming increasingly unstable actually shows you that 2025 is probably the year that our global order has finally crumbled.
Definitely, we're seeing a big change in our global order. But Tobias, you're a military man yourself. How desperate is Ukraine for a ceasefire? As Russia's top general says Moscow's forces are advancing along the entire front line. And we keep on getting news about the fact that Russia are on the front foot. They do have more men and they are winning this.
Yes, and this is the perhaps embarrassment for NATO, the most formidable military alliance the world has ever seen, on its doorstep, unable to deal with the threat from Russia, using the excuse that Ukraine is not actually a member of NATO. Now realizing, and you saw this with the previous outgoing NATO Secretary General saying we should have done more early on. There's constant public debate about each weapon system or going up in escalation of lethality to help Ukraine. Now that America is stopping the slowness of the debate, the discussion of how to support Ukraine, it's now for the rest of Europe to rally together to give the lethality that they require and use those frozen assets to support Ukraine's funding of its war.
But Tobias, it's interesting. You talk to me about frozen assets, but there's a debate about frozen assets right now too, and them not being released. Yeah. We see Europe once again stuck in that situation, and that's what Donald Trump's saying. They're just talking. Nothing's really been done. But Zelensky has been on a charm offensive around Europe. We've seen that. He's also preparing to deliver an updated peace plan to the US. I mean, right now, after our discussion and after what Donald Trump said to Politico, he's in a difficult spot. Does he have any leverage left whatsoever?
Look, let's not kid ourselves that America actually was on the same side as Europe in the long term. Trump simply wanted a short-term deal, as I stressed, to somehow rekindle a relationship with Russia. It's absolutely bizarre that a country that was at the forefront of standing up to the Soviet Union doesn't recognize that Russia has not changed its spots. And until that happens, I'm afraid America is going to absent itself from supporting efforts in Europe. That is the reality check that we now need to face. And what is very apparent is if that European leaders don't give Ukraine support, then the conflict will spread beyond Ukraine itself. That's what's keeping us up at night in the rest of Europe. And now that America has stepped back, that's at least provided clarity, and we can stop this hesitance that you've mentioned a couple of times as to why we're not doing enough to actually push Russia and help Ukraine.
And Tobias, if Donald Trump just says, OK, I'm walking away from this, like you said, he wants a quick deal. It hasn't happened. He said originally I could end this war in 24 hours. He's now saying it's the hardest one I've ever had to settle because there's so much hate between Zelensky and Putin. If he says I'm done, what happens then?
Well, I don't think we should even contemplate him remaining inside the conversation. He's now made it clear through that Politico interview that he actually wants to help the right-wing parties across Europe cause more political discord unless European countries are more subservient to American thinking and helping the America First agenda. And no country in their right mind is going to go down that road. But the bigger picture is, as I stressed a number of times now, is that America has no interest in European security per se. I could see Donald Trump pulling military assets out of Europe and moving them in other parts of the world. So at least we know where we stand with America. We should not keep the charade going any further, but work together to provide Ukraine the necessary support that they need in order to be able to stand up to Russia. If that doesn't happen, as I say, wider conflict in Europe is going to be inevitable.
It's a scary prospect, Tobias Ellwood, but thank you as always for your analysis and insight.
Thank you.